Hello, welcome to this online workshop on cover letters for the academic job market. This workshop is part of a series of workshops that we put on for graduate students and postdocs who are preparing for the academic job market. The workshop series also has information on teaching statements, diversity statements, as well as other things. And so if you haven't looked at those, we encourage you to do so. This workshop will draw on some prior information from those workshops, but either way, this video series for the cover letters workshop will also be helpful even if you haven't watched those other videos. So before we begin, I want to start with a quick land acknowledgement. This is even more important if we're zooming in or we're not necessarily physically present at UC San Diego, because UC San Diego is the institution that is bringing us together in this format. And UCSD was built on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. So let's pause now to acknowledge that land and the original people of the area where the university is located. Today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. We acknowledge their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them for their stewardship. No matter where you are, you can see whose land you're on at this website, native-land.ca, and I hope you'll do so. Okay, getting started with our resource. This resource on academic cover letters is broken into 3 different parts. We are at part 1. Part 1 will address what is an academic cover letter and how does it compare to other items in your application packet. In part 2, we'll explore what information should be included in a cover letter, and in part 3, we'll have some ideas for getting started. So as I mentioned, this video is part 1. And in this video, we're going to explore a key question that we often get at the Writing Hub when we encounter folks who are writing cover letters for the academic job market. And that question is, what is the difference between a cover letter for the academic job market versus a regular cover letter and all the other statements I have to write for this job? And this is a really important question because there are some key important differences that you should know about. So in order to answer this question, let's first explore what the regular cover letter is. Let's first get clear on cover letters as a genre of writing. So whether you're writing a cover letter for the academic job market or a regular cover letter for a job or an internship, think of a cover letter as a rhetorical situation. And what does that mean? A rhetorical situation is merely an occasion or circumstance for communicating with a reader or another person. And in this occasion for communication, you are trying to persuasively connect with your reader. You want your reader to have a sense of who you are and what you bring. And so you're trying to connect with them in a way that's persuasive. And through that persuasive connection, you're trying to move your reader to a particular understanding or point of view. And what is the understanding or point of view that you are trying to move them toward? That you are a capable and qualified candidate who can fit the needs of this job, this team, or this organization. And so both of these are really important. This is a multifaceted, or this is a two-sided viewpoint that you are trying to move your reader toward. You want to move them toward the point of thinking this person is capable and qualified, but you also want your reader to think this person fits our needs. This person is going to be equipped for our team, our organization, or to do this job in our organization. As applicants, though, when we're looking at these positions and we're trying to connect with this audience, we often spend too much time thinking about how to prove that we are capable and qualified. And that makes sense because when it comes to searching for jobs, your audience controls a resource that you need. And so because you are so dependent on getting this job, or because you necessarily need access to the resource that your audience controls, it's easy to sort of focus in on yourself and to think, I really need to prove that I'm the one that they want. I'm capable, I'm qualified. So because lots of us are really worried or preoccupied with proving our qualifications, We often or sometimes don't spend enough time thinking about who are my audience? What kind of organizational context do they work in? What is this team? What is this group of people like? What do they value? What do they need? Why does this job exist on this team in this organization? And what is the candidate who fills this job going to have to do? And what are they going to have to be like in order to be successful in this context? So because we're so worried or preoccupied thinking about ourselves, sometimes we neglect to think, well, who is my reader? And what do they need? And what do they care about? And how can I connect myself to my sense of what they need? So both of these aspects, both of these dimensions matter a lot in a cover letter. But if we're too much in our feelings, or we're too much in our anxiety, we will certainly neglect one of these in favor of the other. And so I think it's a good idea just to acknowledge and plan ahead for the feelings that you have about the job search process. There's lots of doom and gloom out there about preparing for or about the academic job market, and that creates a lot of feelings. And so if you haven't already watched the videos on preparing for the academic job market, that's the first set of videos in this series. I encourage you to do that because your feelings will make themselves known in the writing that you produce and also in your process for producing those writing or those products. And so sit with that and just remember that when it comes to a cover letter, you can prove that you are capable and qualified, but you can't neglect your audience and their needs either. So a cover letter ultimately is a response in a conversation. And for this, I think a metaphor is helpful. Imagine that you're sitting in a theater and you're about to watch a play, and one cast member or an actor comes out and starts offering a monologue. And the idea that, and they start talking a lot about different kinds of things. And then a second actor comes out and starts talking to the first actor. And you think, okay, these two actors or these two characters are now going to engage in a dialogue. But then imagine that suddenly the second actor just turns to the audience and starts monologuing. You're like, okay, I guess this isn't a dialogue. I guess this is a monologue. And so how this metaphor extends to cover letters is I want you to imagine that when a university or a department or an organization puts out a job call, they advertise a position. That is like the first character coming out on stage and starting the conversation. The job call itself is the initiating part of the conversation. Your cover letter and your materials that you submit for a job, whether academic or otherwise, need to respond to that monologue, not create their own second monologue. What you are doing in a cover letter, as well as other materials for a job application, is inviting a kind of dialogic, two-way conversation. So you want to respond directly to what is in the job ad, but also invite the folks behind the job ad, the real human being people who wrote that, to respond back to you and have a dialogue back to you in turn. And so that ball bounces back and forth in a dialogic way. And so a cover letter is a response in a conversation that was started when this organization or this team put out their job call. So what does that mean for your for your cover letter? First, your cover letter is not necessarily a list of skills, experiences, or what makes you great for a particular job. You have a lot of skills and experiences, and there are a lot of things that make you great for a lot of jobs. That couldn't fit in a single document. So it's not a list, and it's not a thorough or detailed account of everything you've done or everything you could do. There's a lot about you that won't be represented in the cover letter. Again, the cover letter is too short. It's too small to be representative of everything you've done or everything you could do in this organization. And it's not even necessarily a showcase for your most impressive achievements. So if you've won awards or have really prestigious publications, that is an impressive achievement. But again, if you don't think that your audience is going to respond in a dialogic way to those achievements, you should consider whether or not they need to be in your cover letter for this reader. Ultimately, remember, your cover letter is not a monologue. So what is it exactly? A cover letter, whether for academic jobs or regular non-academic jobs, I shouldn't say regular, but academic or non-academic jobs, a cover letter is a curated account of particular aspects of your professional self or your experiences. So I'm going to highlight that word curated. Curated means that you have carefully selected the most important things. And how do you select those most important things? By thinking about your audience and thinking about what they need. And that gets to the second piece. This curated account of aspects of your professional self or your experiences responds to the kind of professional it seems like they need for this job, on this team, in this organization. And so if we translate that to academic cover letters or academic job market cover letters in particular, an academic job market cover letter is a snapshot. It's not the whole thing. It is just one quick snapshot of key aspects of your scholarly work. I'm going to pause for just a minute and unpack what I mean by scholarly work. There's a lot that goes into being a scholar or being an academic. You already know this because you've experienced it as a graduate student or postdoc. Grad students and postdocs, just like faculty, they wear many different hats. They're involved in departmental service efforts, as well as university-wide committees and initiatives. That's on top of the courses that they're teaching, the courses that they're developing so that they can teach them in the future, and the courses that they'll never necessarily be able to teach, but it's really interesting topics to them, so maybe it's informing their research. That is, of course, on top of the research that they are currently doing, the publications or writing projects that they have in the pipeline, as well as all other research things that they're doing, such as looking out for fellowships or applying for grants. And so scholarly work entails all of this, not to mention all of the work that goes into making all aspects of scholarly work more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. And so your cover letter is going to be a snapshot of key aspects of your scholarly work. That means it's going to touch on all of these different facets or particular facets of the vast range of what constitutes scholarly work. And just like in a regular cover letter, your academic cover letter will reflect the kind of scholarly work it seems like faculty do in this department and this institution. Again, keep in mind that your cover letter needs to have both of those functions. It needs to show that you're a capable and qualified candidate that can respond to the needs of this organization, this job, on this team. And so if you think about your cover letter for academic jobs, it's important to keep in mind what faculty life is like in that department and that institution, because our institutional context and our department context really shape the kinds of courses we teach, the kind of research we do, who's involved in our research projects, how much money is involved in our research projects, what kind of equipment we need. Our institutional context really inform all aspects of our scholarly work. And so while you're offering that snapshot of key aspects of your scholarly work, you want to be doing that in a way that can reflect the kind of work that is done at this department and this institution. And so how does this relate to your other statements or other aspects of your application packet? In previous workshops and in previous videos, we went over different statements that you might have to write and you might encounter while on the faculty job market. And so your cover letter is different from your statements in a few ways. First of all, each statement will articulate key themes and ideas for that singular aspect of scholarly work. So for example, a teaching statement is highlighting one thing in the broader umbrella of what counts as scholarly work. Teaching is one part of scholarly work, research is another part, other kinds of service efforts or things that you've done towards diversity and inclusion and equity, those are also aspects of scholarly work, and they get their own statements most of the time. So a statement kind of zooms in on one corner of this broader area of scholarly work. And in that one corner, it recounts experiences and you unpack the themes that are key for you that you want to convey about yourself in this realm or in this particular corner. And at the end or throughout those statements, you explicitly signal the significance or implications of your experiences for your future as a professor in that area. So in your teaching statement, you're signaling the future implications for you as a teacher or as someone who teaches and mentors students. In your research statement, you're signaling the implications for your future as a researcher, as someone who contributes to knowledge in this discipline, and vice versa, right? So your statements will signal the significance and future implications for different areas of scholarly work. The difference between that and a cover letter is the cover letter kind of encompasses or kind of reviews all of it. And so your cover letter will distill the key takeaway of each statement and the materials that go with it. So for example, in your cover letter, you might have a paragraph on teaching. You have one paragraph to distill the key takeaway that someone would get, that you're hoping a reader would get after reading your entire teaching statement. If you could summarize the main argument of your teaching statement into a few sentences, that's the kind of thing that would go in the cover letter. In addition, the cover letter should explicitly align each takeaway with the goals of the department, the institution, or the job. So whereas your statements will weave in the relevance throughout through signaling those implications that are hopefully relevant to the institutional context, in your cover letter, you need to make that alignment as explicit as possible. So if you, for example, in your teaching statement paragraph or your teaching paragraph, you would distill the key takeaway of your teaching statement and then make a few very explicit sentences to this job at this university. And implicitly, by doing all of this, you will be signaling what the reader is likely to find in the rest of the packet. So again, with that example of your teaching paragraph, you have a key to distilled takeaway. You'll have a sense or you'll explicitly align that takeaway with this opportunity, this job. And by doing that, your reader has some implied expectation for what they'll find when they turn to your teaching statement. It won't be a surprise to them. In fact, the teaching statement will just explore even further and provide more rich details to the key takeaway that you signaled in the cover letter, which might be the first thing that they read. And getting to that second part of what a cover letter has to do, again, the cover letter should reflect the kind of scholarly work it seems like faculty do in this department and institution. So how does that connect with each statement, or how does this differ from the statements? For the statement workshops, we suggested taking a template approach, meaning that you craft 2 or 3 different template statements that would be suitable for different institutional contexts. So perhaps for your teaching statement, you would have a teaching statement for a small, primarily undergraduate institution, perhaps a mid-sized public university, and perhaps a large R1 university. And your teaching statement for those different institutional contexts would probably emphasize different things. Smaller classes for the small, primarily undergrad university versus larger classes with huge numbers of students for the R1 university. And so we recommended that template approach that you would then weave in particular institutional relevance. So by having this template approach, we emphasize that you could paint a relevant picture by selecting and retelling experiences that would be relevant in that institutional context, or by signaling the implications of those experiences in a way that is relevant for the institutional context. So if you have a lot of experiences at an R1 university like UC San Diego, but you're applying to a smaller liberal arts university, you would draw different implications or signal different experiences that you would use to connect your experiences, which happened in an R1 context, to a small liberal arts university context. And so that's what the statements do in order to connect to the different institutional context to which you're applying. And the cover letter makes the fit for this department direct and explicit. So for the statements, we emphasized, or we tried to recommend, a template approach where your signaling of the relevance and your signaling of the fit is woven in throughout based on what experiences you choose and how you choose to talk about them and how you choose to talk about the implications from those experiences. The cover letter is just much more direct. It has much less space, and it has to talk about more in less space. And so in your cover letter, you want to make your fit for this department or this job in this department as direct and as explicit as possible and respond directly to the needs in the job call. So I want you to remember that theater metaphor again, that the first actor comes out and has a monologue, and then the second actor responds directly to that first one. That's what your cover letter is kind of doing. It is responding directly to the conversation that was initiated by the job call. And so that's why you want to respond directly and explicitly to some of the things that you see in the job ad in your cover letter. And by doing all of this, by signaling the key takeaway of these different aspects of your scholarly work, by being very clear and explicit about how you see your work or yourself aligning with the needs of this job in this department, you're inviting the next step of the conversation, the next step in the hiring process. So how does the cover letter complement other materials in the packet? We just talked about how the cover letter is different and why the cover letter is different from other materials. But now let's think about, how do they all work together? How do they complement each other? And to do this, I want you to consider these metaphors. So imagine first you have an outfit. So here we see a mannequin wearing a coat and a dress and some snazzy shoes. And this is a particular outfit. Here's a second outfit. Here's a third outfit. And what you can see here is that they're all slightly different. All of these outfits have different features and they entail different components. And so if we think of your statements or the different aspects of your application in this metaphor, each one is its own outfit. It's its own ensemble. And what does the cover letter do then with these outfits? It puts them all together in a kind of display. Notice what happens when you look at a display like this, a window display, versus when you looked at each particular outfit. You don't necessarily see all of the details emerging at once. If you looked more carefully at them, if you sort of zoomed in on this middle figure here, you might notice particular details, but at first, your initial impression is to see the whole scene. And that's kind of what a cover letter does. It provides a whole scene, a backdrop, a more sort of holistic idea, even if there aren't necessarily details that stand out right away, we can see a broader impression starting to form. That's just one metaphor. I have a few more. So imagine your application materials are like different dishes that a person could cook. So here we have a pizza, we have salad, I think we have some kind of bread and some kind of sandwich. So if you look at each of these different pieces, you can notice different features. We are paying attention to the details of this salad. We see the different colors, and it looks like there's some kind of salad dressing on it. And so we can see the details of this particular dish more clearly. Versus, what if we zoomed out and looked at the whole table? Notice that this gives us a different impression. There's more details, or there's different details. So we see that there are these placemats. We see that there are place settings. So it's no longer just a collection of dishes, it's a whole picture. It's a whole scene. Okay, one last metaphor. Imagine, or look at this scene, this nice fall scene with the trees and this rock wall. So the whole scene is nice. It's appealing. It has very vibrant, interesting colors. Imagine that each element of this picture is your statement, or it represents a statement. So if I invited you to look just at this one tree, you would notice different details. You might notice the particular moss pattern on the tree. You might notice the way the branches extend, or the different shades of the leaf colors. If I asked you to notice just the ground the ground underneath the trees, you might notice, okay, there's the leaves, there's grass, there's less grass over here. Look, there's a bird right there. How interesting. If I asked you to examine the background, you could see that there's some other bushes. You don't really see trees, but maybe this is in a wooded area. And likewise, if I asked you just to look at the wall, you would see the different shapes of the rocks. And so each of your statement is allowed to examine some of these details, and there's room for that because each statement will necessarily have to delve into that corner of academic work, that corner of scholarly work. The cover letter is the whole scene. And so because it's the whole scene, it can't review all of the details as carefully. It would just take too long. And the statements are the ones that do that. That's the statement's job. The cover letter provides this whole picture. So now that we've worked through those metaphors, let's think about how your materials in your application packet connect with your cover letter. First, with your materials, such as your statement or your CV. Each of these pieces is carefully considered and crafted because the details that you use matter. We mentioned in the previous workshops and videos that you want to show, not just tell. You want to bring aspects of your experiences into the light, and then you want to talk about the significance and implications of those specific experiences that you provide sufficient relevant details so that your reader can understand the experience. In the materials, someone could see how the different pieces fit together. So they could see, for example, if you taught a class on one topic and then you taught a different class on a completely different topic, that they could still see how that there's a logic to how you would approach teaching overall. So each of your statements has this kind of carefully considered and crafted approach, and your cover letter creates a broader impression. It provides some backdrop, it might provide a couple of additional details, or it might provide connecting elements so that we can see the whole picture starting to emerge. So it's not just regurgitating or copying and pasting slices from each statement into one combined place. It's something that should be more than the sum of its parts. It's something new, and you want this cover letter to be something that is inviting for the person who's reading it. And what do I mean by inviting? I mean it invites them to keep reading. They are intrigued by what they read about in your research paragraph or paragraphs. And so they are invited to go to your research statement and learn more. The other thing I mean by inviting is that it invites them to follow up with you and to keep the conversation going. They want to respond back in that dialogue. And if you're not sure if your documents are complementing each other, if you're not sure if you're repeating yourself too much or if they work nicely together, this is where you absolutely should get readers' feedback. It is really difficult, if not impossible, to figure that out by ourselves when we are the writers of these documents. We're just too close to them. And so talk to peers, talk to your faculty, talk to advisors or mentors, or if you're a graduate student, get feedback from a writing consultant at the Writing Hub. And readers' feedback can help you navigate whether the documents are working well together and whether they complement each other, or if they are not doing that. So putting it all together. The cover letter will distill the key takeaway that you want to emphasize in each statement, and thinking about not just the statement, but the different corners or aspects of scholarly work. This will signal what the reader is likely to find in the rest of the packet and highlight particular aspects of the scholarly work you've done that you think are most important. It will add additional details as needed. If there's something in your statement that, or something that isn't in your statement that you think is important, a critical detail that you want to give your reader that context before they dive into the rest of it, you can do that in the cover letter, space permitting. Your cover letter will make the fit for this department direct and explicit. So whereas we emphasized a template approach for your statements, I think you should write a separate cover letter for each job that you're applying for, because the cover letter needs to explicitly align the things that you want to talk about with the goals of the department or institution. So what that might mean is that the key takeaway that you distill from your teaching statement might actually be different. So You might have a key takeaway for your teaching statement if you knew that teaching statement would be read by someone at a teaching focused university or college versus if it was being read by someone at a research focused college or even a research institute where there was some teaching involved. So the key takeaway that you would actually decide to include in the cover letter might shift based on who you know your audience is. So I do recommend you write distinct different cover letters for each opportunity. And that will also help you respond directly to the stated needs in the job call. Finally, you want your cover letter to invite the next step in the conversation. The written materials that you'll submit are your response to a conversation that has already been initiated. And remember that the written materials are just one part of this hiring process. They're not the whole process. So all your materials have to do is get your audience, your reader, to be interested in responding back to you. That's it. They're not going to get you the job. They're going to get you the next step in the conversation. So we've reached the end of part 1. Before you move on to the part 2 video, I'd like to invite you just to pause now and reflect. Think about how you've been feeling or how you've been thinking about academic cover letters. Just take a moment to think about that. And then I want you to think about whether those thoughts are conducive for your writing process. So if you feel like you are having a lot of thoughts and feelings around proving yourself, proving your capabilities, proving your qualifications, remember what that might cause you to neglect as you are working on your cover letters. That might cause you to neglect thinking about this university or this department, and therefore your cover letter might be more monologic because you are trying to prove the qualifications. Maybe you're trying to prove them to yourself as you're writing it. So pause and think about how you've been feeling or how you've been thinking about cover letters, whether those thoughts are conducive for a writing process or for the documents you're trying to create. And then think if you want to change them or what a helpful way of thinking or feeling about the cover letters might be. And after you've had a minute to think about that, I invite you to move on to part 2.